We know so much now, not just of what to eat, but how to prepare the food and how to eat the food to maintain the level of nutrients in our body to get maximum protection against cancer, slow aging, and promote longevity. We didn't know this stuff years ago. We have more data to fine-tune things, to give people who are really nutritional enthusiasts, right, the knowledge to really get the full benefits of what they're trying to do. And what we're trying to do is to tell people, you don't have to get cancer, you don't have to have a heart attack, you don't have to have a stroke. We can push the envelope of human longevity. You could live 20 years longer than the average American lives. And we can beat out the blue zones by a mile because modern nutritional science has given us this unprecedented opportunity in human history to eat better and healthier than ever before. And we also can make it taste great.
So I thought I'd start by just setting up a little bit what we're doing here. So we're doing a series of shows around the idea of blood testing as a way to figure out how healthy you are. And we're looking at a bunch of different sets of markers that you might have. And the focus today is nutrients, blood testing for nutrients. But we want to talk more broadly about the role that nutrients play in your health, and then a little bit on how blood testing can or cannot, depending on the nutrient, tell you something about how that nutrient is interacting with your health, and just how to make sense of, if you find yourself getting a blood test that includes nutrients, how to make sense of the results that you're getting back. And I can't think of anybody better to talk to than you about this, because you're one of the most public advocates for nutrients and nutrient density and caring about nutrients and what you eat. So I thought maybe we'd just start with a little bit of background. You're a family physician, you're a 7-time New York Times bestselling author. Tell me a little bit about your journey up through medicine and how you came to focus on nutrients, how you came to this specialty or this sort of area of focus that you've spent so much of your life on.
Well, believe it or not, I actually went to medical school with a specific intent of being a physician specializing in nutritional medicine. Because back in the 1980s, 1970s, I was on the world figure skating team. And I was eating healthfully to improve my stamina so I wouldn't get sick competing internationally. Like Novak Djokovic, the tennis player, improved his diet so he'd have better stamina in the long matches of the tennis courts, long matches that went on and on and on. And so a lot of top athletes eat healthfully for better performance and the anti-aging effects to maintain their careers. So I was into all this stuff, reading about nutrition and trying to eat an excellent diet when I was young. And then I became familiar with natural hygiene, a group of physicians and a thought process that said you are what you eat, and people don't have to have heart attacks. You don't have to have strokes if you eat an excellent diet. These are not the natural consequence of aging, and heart disease still is the number one cause of death, cardiovascular death in the country today. And even cancer can be largely prevented. And the same dietary portfolio that slows aging, prevents cancer, heart disease, and extends human lifespan, can be utilized therapeutically to help people reverse disease and get rid of their asthma, and get rid of their rheumatoid arthritis, and get rid of their multiple sclerosis, and get rid of their chronic headaches, and get rid of their fatigue. So I became like a hobby and interest in nutritional science, and I did so much reading and investment in that field that I said, you know what? I'm going to go back to medical school, get a traditional, and I went to University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, and become a board-certified family physician to get the conventional certification and credentials, and then be able to treat people in that niche for people who want more nutritional information education, to not just cover up the illness with drugs, like give people a high blood pressure medication, and while they still have high blood pressure, and just pushing it down with a drug, but get rid of it so they don't need drugs. Not just give diabetic medications, lower the blood glucose, but have them so they're not diabetic anymore, so they don't need medication. Because you don't get protected against premature death from taking drugs like high blood pressure medications, cholesterol medications, and diabetic medications. You live longer because you don't need medications, because you're not diabetic, you don't have high blood pressure, you don't need drugs to lower your cholesterol, because cholesterol is normal from eating right, and because your body fat's low. And there's no such thing as a healthy overweight person. The point I'm making right now is that nutritional excellence is 1,000 times more powerful than conventional medical care to enable people to live a healthy, happy, and disease-free life. It really is truly protective and can be used therapeutically to reverse disease. And I went to medical school to focus on that as a career. I didn't become a regular doctor and then switched. I had the whole intent from the very beginning to do it this way. And I've been very blessed and lucky to have the opportunities I've had to speak to millions of people, to have years of television shows on public television where I've been on television for thousands of hours. I've raised over $70 million for public television with my shows on PBS TV. So my show's been seen by millions and millions of people. And that's how I have best-selling books on nutrition and longevity, because many millions of people have bought my books, and so I've been very lucky to have the opportunity to have a lot of people change their life for the better because of my work, my dedication to this field.
It's a really interesting path. I mean, medical schools are sort of famous for not teaching nutrition very well. I think even today we hear that from doctors that we work with and folks just coming out of medical school. So tell me about that intersection of somebody who came in with that nutritional focus, and you encountered traditional medical school education. How did you find it? Was there enough there for you, or did you have to sort of continue learning on your own and figure out how to marry that traditional perspective with a more nutrition-forward approach?
Well, believe it or not, I enjoyed medical school. I felt the foundation of what I learned there, if anything, supported everything I want to do.
Interesting.
Because it wasn't contradictory. It was contradictory with the conventional medicine. Because they taught you the first thing in medical school, the first week they said drugs are toxic, and they put poisons into the body that shorten people's lifespan, and people should live in a manner to avoid the need for medicinal substances whenever possible. And here's how the drug works, by blocking or interfering with the natural body process. And we went all over how the longevity of cells is related to the nutrient concentration and diversity of cells and the level of toxicity in the cell, or metabolic waste products, because we have both cells that are exposed to internally created wastes that our own body makes. Those are called endogenous waste, and then the exogenous waste from the external environment on top of that. And the high nutrient levels in the cells, particularly of phytochemicals, phytonutrients, and antioxidants, enables the cell to keep itself clean, remove toxins, carcinogenic substances, repair the DNA. So we're talking here about, I learned what the basic biology and biochemistry and physiology of the human body in medical school to enhance my work in nutritional field, even though it didn't directly talk about nutrition with any training. And I, of course, supplemented that with my hours and hours of dedication to reading more than 50,000 scientific journal articles on nutrition and longevity and health. And so I spent my life pouring through research articles and becoming an expert in this body of knowledge, and combining the two, a conventional medical education with nutritional science research. And I'm also the president of the Nutritional Research Foundation. So and in medical school, believe it or not, they made me chairperson of the Nutritional Education Committee at University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. And I was on the admission committee there too. I interviewed people to come to the medical school. And it was funny because I even lectured. I even spoke about nutrition to my medical students. And so when it's funny because I've been walking in it's called, the stadium seating they have in an auditorium where you're sitting up to watch the lecturer in front. And the school had very good lecturers that were entertaining and, experienced. So I'd be walking to my chair to sit down, and I'd see people who were younger than me taking their chips or cookies and hiding it behind their back, moving their junk food away. And I'd say, I'm not your mother, you can eat whatever you want. I'm not looking at you or inspecting what you're doing, But I had a lot of my contemporaries that I went to medical school with were very grateful and kept in contact with me on how much I affected their career and their personal health and their personal, actually, medical careers when they left medical school too, because they knew me as a friend, and we talked about this a lot.
My background's in nutrition. I thought I knew everything, but it wasn't until I was tracking that I had to ground truth my assumptions with what was actually happening in my real life. The only way to actually know what works is real data. Using levels has been life-changing. For one, I've learned how food individually affects me, even though I know as a physician how stress impacts your glucose levels and your cortisol levels. It was very eye-opening to see right in front of me in real data that my glucose levels go through the roof under certain forms of stress. You can see how food, stress, sleep, and exercise impact you personally to make smarter choices that improve your health. With features like AI-powered food logging, real-time blood sugar tracking, comprehensive blood testing, and personalized dietitian support, Levels gives you everything you need to optimize your health. Whether your goal is losing weight, having more energy, or choosing the right diet for you, Levels gives you the full picture of your metabolic health. Stop guessing, start knowing, check out Levels, and click the first link in the description. Now, back to the episode.
Over this career of focusing on this, what have you learned? What do you know now that you didn't know back then? What's emerged for you, or what have you learned through the practice of implementing some of these things that you were thinking about and learning and reading about back then as you were a student with now decades of working with actual people?
Wow, 100 different things. I mean, I could start anywhere, but well, there's a lot more science available today that gives us the biological explanation of why it works. You know what I mean? So that's really what we know. We can give a lecture and give so much science, and we can show so much research articles. So we have a lot more information today than we just do the empirical evidence of what seemed to work before. We knew mushrooms were really healthy for people. We knew they even help people live longer. You know, we knew that, but now we know actually that onions and mushrooms have various connection with the way the cell works. There's actually a nutrient in mushroom called ergothioneine that binds to the cell wall, that then that stabilizes the DNA and prevents the DNA of a cell from aging, let's say. So we have this connection with mushrooms, the human body does, that we're built to actually accept the nutrients in mushrooms and utilize them. And the same thing with green vegetables. Our bodies are, you should say, green vegetable dependent animals, or isothiocyanate dependent, ITC dependent, isothiocyanate. And it's really fascinating how these ITCs, or isothiocyanates, probably the most anti-cancer, longevity-promoting compound in vegetables, are found in green cruciferous vegetables. But how much broccoli and cabbage and Brussels sprouts and arugula and green you eat doesn't necessarily give you the protection. It's the blood level of isothiocyanate, it's the urinary isothiocyanate that's related to the high degree of protection. And I'll tell you why. It's kind of interesting. Because the ITCs are formed in the mouth. They're not in the vegetable. They're formed in the mouth as you chew open the cell wall. And as you chew open the cell wall, there's an enzyme called myrosinase that breaks down and catalyzes the reaction in your mouth and mixes with bacteria in your teeth and forms more nitric oxide. But you produce the ITCs in your mouth proportional to how well you chew. Now, the myrosinase enzyme is heat sensitive. So if you overcook the broccoli, boiled it in a soup and the cabbage, and you deactivate the myrosinase enzyme, you won't form much ITCs when you chew the vegetable. But if you took the broccoli rabe, or the collard greens, or the turnip greens, or the kale or collards, and you cold blended it in a blender, so the cell walls were broken down, and the ITCs were formed in the blender, then they would then be stable if you poured it into a soup to cook. But if you poured it into the soup to cook and then you blended it, you would have deactivated the enzymes. But so the ITCs themselves are relatively heat stable, but not the enzyme that forms the ITCs. Here's my point. That for people to get a high level of these protective isothiocyanates, the ITCs in the body, you have to eat a good amount of raw cruciferous vegetables like arugula on your salad and cabbage, and also onions have the same corresponding alliinase enzyme that's heat sensitive to the myrosinase enzyme in green vegetables that forms the anti-cancer organosulfate compounds in onions. People know when they cut an onion, it makes their eyes tear because you're forming a chemical reaction on your kitchen table as you cut the cell wall. So the point I'm making is, the better you chew these things to a complete liquid in your mouth, you could change the amount of ITC formation by 10 to 40-fold, increasing absorption and production by how you're preparing the food, how you're chewing the food, whether you're eating some nuts and seeds with the meal to facilitate the absorption of the fat-soluble compounds. So we know so much now, not just of what to eat, but how to prepare the food and how to eat the food to maintain the level of nutrients in our body to get maximum protection against cancer, slow aging, and promote longevity. We didn't know this stuff years ago. We knew it was good to eat green vegetables. We knew it was good to eat mushrooms. But now we have more data to fine-tune things, to tweak things, to give people who are really nutritional enthusiasts, right, the knowledge to really get the full benefits of what they're trying to do. And what we're trying to do is to tell people, you don't have to get cancer, you don't have to have a heart attack, you don't have to have a stroke, you don't have to be demented. We can push the envelope of human longevity. You could live 20 years longer than the average American lives, and we can beat out the blue zones by a mile because modern nutritional science has given us this unprecedented opportunity in human history to eat better and healthier than ever before, and we also can make it taste great. It's been very fulfilling to watch people have transformational effects on their health, their health recoveries, and to see the outcomes. And to see the outcomes, even people who have cancer are now living 15, 20, 25 years later with no further cancer recurrences because they've embraced this type of nutritional excellence.
Let's stay on the topic of nutritional research for a moment, because I'm coming at this from the perspective of a health journalist. I'm reading studies. I'm trying to figure out what to write about. I'm trying to figure out how to educate the public. And nutritional science is just famously very hard to do, right? And when you talk to the public, the average person, they're confused. They'll say, well, one day you're supposed to eat this, the next day you're supposed to eat this is better for you, this isn't. And they'll cite headlines, right, that my colleagues will often overstate conclusions, will often be a little too hyperbolic, and a particular study extrapolating that to some larger point. But I think for the average person, making sense of nutritional science is hard. And my sense talking to researchers and doctors is nutritional science is hard to do, right? It's hard to get massive random control trials on things. It's hard to get long-term data. It's hard to go from the cellular effects that we might be able to study in the lab or in animals or in small populations to the real world. How do you think about making sense of nutritional science and helping the layperson? Because I know you still work a lot with folks who are trying to improve their diet, trying to help them get more nutrients. How do you translate the nutritional science into the kind of real world and combat this sort of confusion that I'm sure you encounter with the folks that you work with as well?
No, I don't.
Okay, good.
The nutritional confusion is due to internet marketers and people who have some kind of position because they're funded by the meat industry or the dairy industry or the sugar industry. You can take some science to defend any position. But if you look in a comprehensive fashion and you spend time reading thousands of articles, right? So I'm saying I've read 30 to 50,000 articles. So in my book, Eat for Life, my most recent book, I picked out the 1,000 most important nutritional references for people to be aware of. And I truly had each chapter go over what each chapter represents, maybe 300 to 500 nutritional research articles, what those articles cumulatively, how they corroborate each other. And rather than seeing all these articles contradicting each other, that's not true. It's that if you look at the full mass of nutritional science out there, the corroborative evidence is unbelievably consistent, and the message is not contradictory. It's pretty straightforward. You have all these groups trying to take one small study and that are done incorrectly, the same thing the drug industry too. But if you look at all the studies in a comprehensive manner, without a predetermined bias, then we see a general trend that is hard to deny by people who are very intellectually sane and emotionally sane.
Right.
For example, study on nuts and seeds and prevention of cardiovascular death and cancer deaths, right? So we're saying the American diet gets its fat intake from animal fats and oils. Yet, no studies contradict this. When you reduce animal fats and oils and instead get your fats from whole food, nuts and seeds and avocados, you get about a 30% reduction in all-cause mortality and about 40% reduction in cardiovascular mortality. That's incredible. You can't reduce mortality by 30, 40% with any intervention, but this hasn't translated, compared to eating oils and animal fats and nuts and seeds. Like, for example, do you have a salad every day? And on that salad, do you put a dressing made with nuts and seeds, like a walnut balsamic or an orange sesame dressing? Or do you put oil and vinegar, like olive oil and vinegar, right? So the question is, this science never got filtered down to the population because a lot of marketers and people, the way they want to eat, but the science isn't confusing. It's absolutely stunningly corroborative and consistent, showing that if you use the fat from whole nuts and seeds, then you would dramatically have a longer lifespan. Plus the fact that oils have caused a lipemic rush in the blood, and animal fats cause this lipemic rush, which means you get a whole bunch of fat in the blood at one time. Like sugar and white flour white flour is sugar and enters the bloodstream as sugar, gives you a glycemic rush in the blood. So you have this huge amount of calories going through the bloodstream that then stimulate the dopamine centers in the brain, same as if you had eaten, as if you had snorted cocaine or shot up with heroin, and you become dopamine insensitive, and you develop cravings for higher caloric intake and for high calories in the blood at one time, right? So people become habituated to and addicted to overeating, and now we have Americans eating generally about double the amount of calories humans need for good health, because the diet is low in nutrients, and they habituated to the addictive nature of food, and of course everybody in America is overweight and cancer prone. But what I'm saying right now is that when you eat a diet that's really healthy, you don't feel like overeating. You're satisfied with the right amount of calories. If you're not addicted to cocaine, you don't want cocaine. If you're not addicted to the caloric rush, you don't have to get all those calories in to be satisfied. So I'm using the example of nuts and seeds as how much consistent the nutritional science literature is, demonstrating that eating walnuts and flax seeds and sesame seeds extend lifespan. We could do the same thing looking at the consistency of the scientific literature and the most, stunning information of the last decade in nutritional science is that as you dial up more animal protein into a person's diet, you go from 5% to 10% to 20%, 25%, 30% to 35%, right? As you dial up more animal protein, you dial down lifespan accordingly, and you increase risk of cancer and cardiovascular deaths proportionally to the increase in to animal protein intake. That doesn't stop the keto or the carnivore people from taking it at once to saying you have no randomized controlled trials, where's this, where's that, I feel better, I'm doing better. But we have to go with, when we look at the impact of hundreds of studies that corroborate each other, we also see that as we dial up more plant protein in the diet, we get longer lifespan. So it's not even controversial anymore. We know that people on these diets that are richer in animal products have shorter lifespans. They're promoting growth, promoting hormones. We understand the mechanisms via which that the bacteria in the gut now produce a different type of toxins from eating those type of foods, like TMAO, trimethylamine oxide, which increases risk of kidney failure, cancer deaths, and cardiovascular deaths. We know about these, what's going on. We're understanding how the body works. But as we dial up more plant protein in the diet, we prevent these hormones from promoting cancer cell replication, and we extend lifespan accordingly. And the question is, what are the foods that are highest in plant protein that people are eating that's extending human lifespan? And it's pretty simple. It's the same foods that are extending. It's green vegetables, nuts and seeds, right? And beans. Green vegetables, nuts and seeds, and beans have the most scientific evidence to be linked to longer lifespan in humans. So what I'm saying, to answer to your question, contrary to what people get on the internet and the media, us nutritional scientists who are reviewing thousands of articles are stunned by how consistent the nutritional science literature is in being pointing to this opportunity of what would be the proper diet to extend human lifespan, which, by the way, being a plant-based or being a plant-strong diet like that is also best for the planet, for climate change, the plant pollution in the planet as well. So those things come together. That's where the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, the only board certification authority of physicians who are using lifestyle and diet to help their patients, are behind what I'm saying, because that's where the science is. This is evidence-based.
I like that. What I'm hearing you say is some of the challenges I'm identifying are a challenge of perspective, not of knowledge. It's not that we don't know. It's that often we, whether that's the media, the average person consuming it, maybe even some folks in the medical profession, are just narrow casting a little bit too much. And if we take a broader view, we'll see some of these truths emerge.
Yes, we have a lot of evidence for the type of advice we give people, and that evidence, people should understand. The evidence is not scanty; it's overwhelming.
Well, let's move on to maybe digging into nutrients as a topic a little bit more, and then we'll talk about the notion of blood testing. So I'm just going to start really dumb, high level. What is a nutrient? We toss that word around, but what is a nutrient? How should we think about what it is and what role it plays in our body?
Well, we're talking really here about micronutrients, because macronutrients are fat, carbohydrate, and protein, and water. There are 4 macronutrients. And I'm saying right now that Americans eat too much fat, they eat too much protein, and eat too much carbohydrates. Those are the 3 sources of calories. Americans overeat calories, which shortens their lifespan. And the reason they overeat calories, because they're not getting enough micronutrients and fiber. Because when you don't get enough micronutrients and fiber, and by the way, Americans are ubiquitously nutritionally deficient because they're eating processed foods and animal products, which don't contain, their diet is 60% processed foods and 35% animal products, which neither one contains phytochemicals and antioxidants. And it's the diversity of phytochemicals and actually the diversity of fibers that gives us the best bacteria in the gut to prevent disease. But getting back to your question here is that, yes, the micronutrients are vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals and phytonutrients found in plants, right? And they're vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, phytochemicals, and antioxidants that do not contain calories. And because we're not eating enough of those rich phytochemical and antioxidants-rich plants, Americans are ubiquitously nutritional deficient. They're not deficient in macronutrients, they're deficient in micronutrients. And I'm saying getting more micronutrient bang per caloric buck, getting more micronutrient bang per macronutrient buck is the secret to a longer lifespan.
Right.
So we have to eat more foods with a high micronutrient density and diversity. And when you do that, your cells are less toxic, less inflammation, and you also become instinctually satisfied with the right amount of calories. And you feel comfortable eating whatever your caloric requirement may be. But when you, and I'm saying here that a piece of chicken is like a bagel. Now, why am I saying a piece of chicken is like a bagel? Because they're both sources of macronutrients without having a significant micronutrient load. The bagel is rich in carbohydrate, but where's all the phytochemicals and antioxidants that would have come along if you had a mango or a strawberry instead of the bagel? The chicken is rich in protein, but where's all the phytochemicals and fibers and antioxidants and protective isothiocyanates? Have you got your protein from sesame seeds or pumpkin seeds or something, right? So we're talking here that the idea that the American diet is high in animal products and processed foods makes people dangerously deficient, which sparks an epidemic of cancer across the modern world, because we are a vegetable-dependent animal, like the other primates are. And I always tell people, if you don't like green vegetables, you better live close to a hospital, because you can't expect to have a normal life without a high green vegetable intake.
So I like that perspective, because I feel like we do focus so much on the macronutrient side, right? Like we're always telling people, get more protein, right? Healthy fats, healthy carbohydrates, right? But I think this focus on micronutrients is going a level deeper, right? And really saying, no, it matters what the sources of these are. So how do you think about then you say, folks eat too much protein, too many carbs, and too much fat. How do you think then about macronutrient balance? Or do you not even sort of focus on that and say, let's just talk about getting the right foods in? Do you counsel people to get 30% protein, 40% fat, et cetera?
No way, that's just ridiculous.
Okay.
And you don't have to focus on that. So let's, in other words, people are focused on the macronutrients and missing the whole point. They shouldn't. In other words, green vegetables are critically important, and they're rich in protein. Beans are rich in inositol pentachous phosphate. They're slowly digestible carbohydrates. They're rich in protein. They have a lot of resistant starch. These foods already have the right protein, fat, and carbohydrate ratio, right? Even whole grains have plenty of protein. The nuts and seeds are a source of good, healthy fat. Like people know that flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, walnuts are rich in short-chain omega-3 fatty acids that stabilize the heart against cardiac arrhythmias. But they're also full of lignans that are digested by bacteria in the gut that have anti-estrogenic effects to prevent breast and prostate cancer. So the same foods that protect the heart against arrhythmia, and when you're eating foods that have natural foods, you're getting the right ratio of fat, carbohydrate, and protein, and the ratio could be somewhat different. It's not some weight carbohydrate and fat balance. It's the type of fat people are eating are addictive and make people get overweight and overeat calories. When you eat enough healthy food and your nutrient levels are high, then you instinctually desire the right amount of calories, and we don't overdo the fat, the carbohydrate, or the protein. Keep in mind, I'm saying that people are in America eating too much fat, too much carbohydrate, and too much protein. So that means they're eating too many calories. And how are overweight people thinking they're going to lose weight successfully without focusing on micronutrients and trying to adjust some right idea of this macronutrient basis? And that's where let's say these people are coming to a keto diet or an Atkins diet or a carnivore diet. The reason they're advocating that is because they're radically restricting carbohydrate that puts the body into an emergency state where the brain can accept ketones as an alternative fuel to break down fat to make ketones for the brain, which helps people able to eat their cake and get some, not be overweight, or eat their meat and not be overweight. But that causes the chronic acidosis and the lack of protective nutrients that radically shortens human lifespan. So we're saying that all the long-term studies on people following those type of diets show they have the most early life mortality, which means the most deaths before the age of 70. So you can't trick Mother Nature by some gimmick to lose weight. You can smoke cigarettes to lose weight too, or snort cocaine and smoke cigarettes to lose weight. But the truth is, we're a primate, and the right way to do it is to eat right. Right? And when you do eat right, you're not deficient in protein. But if you're, like for example, there are 5 plant foods. Let's say you're a complete vegan, not eating any animal products at all. The 5 plant foods are fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts and seeds, and intact whole grains. The only one marginally low in protein is fruit. So the only way you can get your diet excessively low in protein is if you eat too much fruit and not enough vegetables, beans, and nuts, right? Or you pour oil on your food. Get a third of do what most Americans do. They get 500 calories of oil a day poured over the food. They just took 15 grams of protein out of their diet, because if they got that same calorie content from sunflower seeds and sesame seeds and whatever, hemp seeds, if they were eating nuts and seeds in place of that oil, they would have got the fat with protein, with fiber, with anti-cancer nutrients in. Plus, you don't absorb the full phytochemicals from the salad you're eating if there's not some fat with the meal. But when the fat from the nuts and seeds come with the meal, the fat is absorbed slowly into the bloodstream at 1 or 2 calories a minute, which the body can then preferentially burn for energy and keep you even controlled your whole afternoon, as opposed to putting oil on the food, which is absorbed almost instantaneously, about 40 calories a minute, which creates a spike of calories in the blood that drives overeating behavior. So now this person says, oh, I had a bowl of vegetable bean soup, and I had a big salad with nuts on it, and I had 2 pieces of fruit for dessert, and I'm still feeling empty. I got to have a pizza. I got to have some a burger. I got to have some cheesecake. I got to have an ice cream cone. They'll never be satisfied with normal food because it doesn't spike their brain with enough caloric concentration that the oil would have done. But I'm saying if you're eating a normal amount of calories, and by the way, Americans eat about 3,200 calories a day on the average, where most primitive societies eat about 1,600. So I always say, half of what we eat feeds our needs, and the other half meets the needs of our doctors, And fat on the body makes chronic inflammation and makes you insulin resistant, and activates aromatase to produce extra estrogen, and has a whole series of cascading effects that increase risk of heart disease, cancer, and accelerates aging of the body, right? So we're saying here that unless you achieve fiber and micronutrient adequacy, you are going to desire excess calories.
Well, I think that's a really good lead into the idea of testing nutrients, right? So we've arrived at the point that micronutrients are what is really important here. So I think that leads to, how do I know how my levels of micronutrients are, and what role in your mind does blood testing play in understanding that picture?
Well, the blood testing can be a motivational factor to help a person make change. Just like a blood pressure medication, a blood pressure can say your blood pressure is high, you got to cut the salt out of your diet. They said, I didn't even know I had high blood pressure. Well, you're eating salt all these years, eventually it flips. So maybe the high cholesterol, high homocysteine, whatever the things we're testing, can be utilized to help target, but help people motivate themselves to make the changes and to give them the confidence of doing the right thing. But let me give you a couple of examples. I mentioned that the nutritional concentration in the cell and the lack of toxicity in the cell is the key to longevity. But also we're talking about the cell membrane, having cell membrane fluidity, and the omega-3 index being favorable to have the right ratio of omega-3 versus omega-6 on the outside of the membrane. And gaining weight and overeating oils is going to have your omega-6 levels be too high, and your omega-3 index is going to be too low because you have extra body fat and you're eating all these seed and grain, all these oils in your diet, right? So when I advise a person to eat healthfully, I want them to lose body fat while they're losing body fat, and they're losing saturated fat stored in the body while they're consuming adequate omega-3 sources like flax seeds and walnuts, and taking an omega-3 supplement as they're losing weight, so we can start to see the omega-3 index come into the favorable range. So the studies over the last decade have shown that the omega-3 index being higher is protective against brain shrinkage with aging and cognitive impairment, but also we're finding in the last 5 years that a higher omega-3 index is linked to longer lifespan and lower risk of all-cause mortality as well. It's not just brain shrinkage. So if your omega-3 index is, somewhat low, maybe 3 or 4, maybe it says, okay, take a little more of that supplement then to bring you up to 5 or 6. So it can help people direct their supplemental regimens. And of course, I'm saying too that there are some benefits to eating animal products, such as B12, omega-3 from seafood and fish, and zinc, that you don't get optimized with plant foods as easily as you can optimize those nutrients with animal products. So by looking at the omega-3 index, it assures us that this person on a plant diet who don't want to take in the toxins from fish or the plastics from fish, because we know that at this point, we know that the dumping of plastic and garbage in the oceans, particularly the bottom feeders, like clams and oysters and mussels and scallops and crabs and lobster, those are called bivalves. The clams, oysters, mussels, and scallops are called bivalves. They filter a lot of water through them, and when they have the growth of overgrowth of algae and cyanobacteria, and the BMA filters down through the water and gets concentrated in these foods, there's a link now to people eating lake fish with algae overgrowth or fish cough of the continental shelf, particularly bivalves and shellfish, with clusters of ALS and PDS, Parkinson's dementia syndrome. So a lot of people into plant-based eating are also keeping their body clean by reducing seafood as well, but then you're reducing omega-3 food and zinc. So it pays to supplement smartly and conservatively with a few elements as we move our diet more plant-based and more plant-heavy, and as we cut back animal products, we're lowering some protective nutrients that are in animal products like B12, zinc, and omega-3 fatty acids. So looking at the B12 level, we're taking those supplements appropriately, and now people would have some confidence that they're taking the right amount because their blood levels confirm they're in the optimal range. Now, one thing to consider here, though, is that B12 in the blood is not a great indicator of where you are. Let me explain for a minute. Because the normal range for B12 in the blood is like 250 to 1,000, let's say, right? So if your level is 600, 700, 800, your level's fine, and you're not going to have to do any more testing. But what if your level is 200 or 300? It's still in the normal range, but it's the lower end of the normal range. It's not that the blood test doesn't really tell you if more would be better for you once you're in that normal range. But that's where a homocysteine is effective. Because a homocysteine elevates in the blood if you're B12 deficient or if you're B6 or folate deficient. Now, this person eating a nutritarian diet like I recommend, with all these green vegetables and beans, are not folate deficient. They're getting tons of folate in their diet. They're getting tons of B6. So now, if the B12 is lower side of normal and the homocysteine is a little elevated, it's most likely elevated because the person needs more B12. So that's an indicator the person could eat more B12, right? There is a very rare disease, a rare genetic defect called a methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase deficiency that can cause homocysteine to rise too. That would mean that their folate's normal, the B12 is normal, but they still have a high level of homocysteine, and then that they may need a supplement to deal with that. But this is something that the blood test can help us evaluate. Is it something common? Is it something unusual? But but good to check that once in a while to make sure that you're having adequate levels, and good to check your omega-3 index, because we all convert the short chain omega-3 from walnuts and flax seeds, and we convert that into the longer chain EPA and then DHA at different genetic capacities. Some people make more, some people make less, and to know your number with how much you have to supplement is probably a good idea, right? Vitamin D is also could be very uniquely independent on that individual, and we're usually not recommending people take huge amounts of vitamin D, but take enough so you're not deficient in the blood. And you can get enough from sunshine or get enough from, but we usually, most people are supplementing conservatively to protect deficiency. But like with any other nutrient, we're talking about a region of homeostasis where too little could be bad and too much could be bad as well. We don't want to just take large amounts of nutrients we don't need, right? So I'm saying right now that, like vitamin D is interesting, is that there was a study on Caucasian surfers in Hawaii and found that they came off the surfing for a couple hours a day, and the majority of them were vitamin D deficient. How do they spend an hour out in the sun every day in a bathing suit and not get enough sunshine? You got to get vitamin D. And they found out the answer was when they came out of the sun, they went into the showers and they used soap and washed their skin. And when you wash the oils off your skin with soap, vitamin D takes time to penetrate into the tissues once you have sun exposure. So you have to leave the oil on your skin and not wash with soap and not, for hours after exposure to get the vitamin D to penetrate the body. So that's why I shower once a month, I only shower once a month, whether I need it or not.
Well, you've just answered a question for me because I got a set of blood testing recently and was low in vitamin D. And I had said to my wife beforehand, like, I don't even need to look at vitamin D. I live in San Diego. I'm surrounded by sun constantly, and I was vitamin D deficient, and maybe that's why.
It could be also that vitamin D is a fat-soluble nutrient, and you need to take your vitamin D supplement with a meal that has fat in it. Yeah. So if you eat your vitamin D with a piece of fruit, there's no fat in it. You're not going to absorb it well. Right. You have to eat the vitamin D with some nuts in the meal, right. Or you have to have the fat on your skin sit there after your exposure and not come in and take a shower after you're exercising outdoors and going for a run or playing a game of tennis with no shirt on or whatever you're doing outside or going for a swim. Don't take a shower that quickly.
Right. So you mentioned vitamin D, the omega-3 index, B, homocysteine, which I want to come back to because it's such an interesting one. Are there other? It sounds like those are all in the set of markers that you can get some utility out of blood testing, whether to get an initial baseline or whether to see whether your supplementation or some nutritional changes are taking effect. Are there other nutrients you find particularly valuable to test in the blood?
It depends, because I prefer that people change their diet and eat healthfully. Because if you test a person on a conventional diet, I would expect all their blood to be messed up and all their blood to be deficient in a lot of different nutrients. Unless you're using it to motivate them to eat better. But I'm assuming, most of my clients and people who follow my advice are eating relatively healthy diets, so they're not going to be grossly deficient in all these nutrients. So we can just target those nutrients that are most likely deficient on a healthy diet. You follow me? Because the average American is just going to be deficient across the board. You can test for everything. And what do just clean your act up, eat healthy. You can't. So whatever the blood test shows, you can't escape from the biological laws of cause and effect. If you don't eat, we're talking about eating fruit, eating a wide variety of natural plants as a method, as a technique to live longer, right? And I have this acronym that I call GBOMBS that delineates these 6 foods that have been shown to have a huge amount of science showing they extend human lifespan and prevent cancer. And the GBOMBS stand for greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds, right? And if you're eating a lot of these foods, then your skin carotenoid score, your beta-carotene in your blood is going to be good. Now, beta-carotene that you're eating in a supplement doesn't make you live longer. But if your levels of lutein, lycopene, beta-carotene are good in your blood because you eat a lot of vegetables, then they're linked to longer lifespan. In other words, it's marking a high vegetable eater because there are hundreds of different carotenoids. You can't just take the one pill and expect to you can't pill yourself or supplement yourself into good health. You need this wide assortment of natural compounds. And the foods that are high in beta-carotene have other compounds, other phytonutrients, many of which haven't been discovered yet or even named yet. So we can flag these nutrients in the blood to indicate people have on poor diets. But I would just say, I can look at your diet and tell you're going to be low on these things too. You know what I mean?
Right.
So fix up your diet first, and then we could look at your blood more selectively.
Right. So we talked a little bit about homocysteine and its relationship to the B vitamins. What I take from that, what you were describing there, is that if you are looking at blood test results particularly in the nutrient space, it's all about the context. It's the context of what you're eating. It's the context of your lifestyle. And it's the context of some of these other markers. Are there other sets of markers that have that kind of relationship? I'm thinking particularly of the one that comes to mind anyway is vitamin D and calcium, which I know have a relationship. Are there other particular markers that you say, look, if you're going to look at the result of this, also look at this or think about these other sets?
Well, certainly. I mean, we're talking here about the fact that, like, you could be eating inadequate calcium and taking in all the extra salt and animal protein and acids that drive the loss of calcium in the urine. And your calcium could be developing osteoporosis and losing calcium, but the blood calcium will be normal, right? Because you could be taking in extra salt in your body all the time, but your body's excreting all the salt in your sweat and your urine, it's trying to get rid of it, and your sodium in your blood is going to be normal. So even when or you could be marginally deficient in zinc, but there's still zinc in the blood is normal. So sometimes we have to look outside the blood, what I'm saying right now is the time the calcium in the blood starts to go down, that probably is calcium binding protein is going down. Because even when people are losing calcium in the blood doesn't go down. So that means calcium binding protein is going down, and albumin's probably down if calcium's down. And that means the person is malnourished. So lower calcium in the blood accompanies with lower albumin and lower total protein means the person has poor assimilation of protein, poor digestion, and they may have something that's interfering with assimilation and absorption, like cancer, or they could be severely sick, malnourished cancer, something like that. So we usually don't see that. So yes, we have to look at other indicators to know what the cause is.
So let's go back to omega-3s for a minute, because within a typical blood test, I know within the one we're offering, there's a bunch of omega markers you're going to get back. There's a couple of omega-6 ones, and then there's the individual omega-3s, and then you're going to get ratios. How would you read that set of blood tests from somebody? What kinds of things are you looking at there?
I don't think it's important to know all the different index to get I mostly reading the omega-3 index.
Okay.
Because that's the most heavily studied there. Right. And the omega-3 index, we're looking to have a number, ideally above 6. Let's say between 6 and 9.
And this is effectively your total of the three?
It's the percent of omega-3 fatty acids and the percent of total fat on the cell membrane. Now, keep in mind that the red blood cell membrane, which measures the omega-3 index, we have a red blood cell turnover about 90 days. So if you're taking a certain amount of omega-3 supplement on a certain diet with a certain body fat, your weight, the supplements, and what your diet is on all affects your omega-3 index. But it has to be steady state for about 4 months because the red blood cell turnover, if you started to lose weight and eat healthy and take the right supplements right now, take the blood 2 weeks later, the red blood cells are going to be the red blood cells that were circulating 2 and 3 months ago. So you got to wait 4 months to take the blood test for it to be accurate.
Right.
And I often tell people, well, lose some weight first and eat the right diet and take the right supplements, and then we'll test your blood maybe 6 months from now. You know what I mean? Because your body weight's going to affect it negatively too. Just like body fat affects triglycerides and cholesterol. The saturated fat you've stored in your own body affects your cholesterol level and your triglycerides. So until you got your body fat and visceral fat low, your cholesterol and your triglycerides are not going to be optimized. You know, so it's a moving target as a person is getting healthier. But yeah, I mean, the most important thing is the omega-3 index. And those other ratios kind of fix themselves. The arachidonic acid gets better. The excess omega-6 goes down with weight loss. So those things, the omega-3 index is the main things because that's where we adjust the supplements. Just like with iron. With iron, we look at, iron sat and total iron binding capacity as maybe an indicator of iron overload in rare diseases like with hemochromatosis but mostly with iron deficiency, we see ferritin go down. Ferritin is iron storage proteins that go down when you're deficient in iron. It's the most sensitive to iron deficiency, except when a person has an autoimmune disease and they have a lot of inflammation, because they're activated, like the rheumatoid arthritis being activated, or an infection, or a cancer or an accelerate cancer, that could make the ferritin falsely go up. But for most people who are not sick, ferritin becomes the most sensitive indicator to iron deficiency.
Interesting.
So we don't need to look at, so there are certain tests that are more sensitive and that we look at we consider to put more weight on. So if your ferritin is below 40, you should be taking some iron. But if your ferritin is above 60, it's better not to take iron because iron is an oxidant, and extra iron is not good for you to have extra. But if you're deficient, then it's better you take it. Right. So it's good to know your ferritin level, particularly for a woman, because us males aren't bleeding each month, and our iron absorption is relatively pretty good. And most males have normal ferritin all the time. We could check it. But for females, either they're losing blood with menstruation. Should they supplement with iron or not? And you really got to know your ferritin to know you should supplement with iron or not. And even postmenopausal women absorb iron at such different rates that some could need iron supplements because of low ability to absorb iron, and other women don't. Right. So the only way to know that it was the blood test is check the ferritin level.
Well, that brings up an interesting point, and maybe we just stay on iron for a moment, but maybe expand these out to others. You mentioned the idea of omega-3 supplements. How do you generally think about supplementation? I would guess that generally we want to get everything we can get from whole foods and from our diet. But how do you think about which particular nutrients are most useful to supplement versus which are not, which are you just not going to get what you need from a supplement?
Great question. Because it's really important people are aware that certain supplemental ingredients are potentially dangerous and cancer promoting. And traditional multivitamins have those cancer promoting ingredients in them. I do make my own line of supplements, so people aren't taking those things in supplemental form. And my line is designed for people who are eating relatively healthy diets. I'm not giving them stuff that they need, that they're just because they're not eating any vegetables and fruits. You know what I mean? But in general, the answer to your question is that folic acid is not the same compound as folate found in vegetables and beans. And when you eat a diet with lots of beans and vegetables in it, you get tons of folate so that your blood level is even up above the normal range even in many cases, right? And the conventional authorities are telling women of childbearing age to take folic acid to prevent neural tube defects. And I'm saying that there's an overwhelming amount of evidence in the scientific literature that folic acid supplementation increases the risk of breast and prostate cancer. It's a synthetic compound. It doesn't exist in nature. It's not the same thing as folate in real food. And the cells can't keep it outside the cell when it doesn't need it, and it leads to excessive cellular replication and is a cancer promoter. And that we have people that are taking folic acid driving increased risk of cancer. And you should be getting your folate from vegetables and beans and not from taking folic acid, even of childbearing age. It's completely, and I'm making this radical claim, and nobody's talking about this except me. I'm saying this viewpoint of conventional medical and health authorities is driving an epidemic of childhood cancer as well, because women, instead of eating vegetables to get folate, are taking folic acid and not eating vegetables, and the lack of vegetables in the diet, not only during pregnancy, but even years prior to conception, is linked to increased risk of acute blastocytic leukemia, the leading cause of cancer death in children. So the cancer in children is affected by the mother's poor diet, including, by the way, brain tumors in children. When you have a child with a brain tumor at age 12, it's affected by what you ate before you conceived the baby even. So, and those are linked to not just the lack of green vegetables in the diet, but also the consumption of luncheon meats and processed meats that affect the woman's having a baby that at age 2 or 3 gets cancer, right? So you're not only causing yourself to get cancer with processed meats like bologna and salami and pastrami and hot dogs and bacon. You're not just increasing your risk of cancer, but if your eggs are in your body as a woman, and maybe even to a certain degree the sperm as well for a male, you're damaging your genes that you can pass on to the future generations. That's how dangerous these foods are. So instead, what does our population do? Instead of advising people to eat vegetables for folate and watch the consumption of luncheon meats, instead we tell them to take folic acid, the synthetic supplements, because people are low in folate in their diet. It was a lost opportunity, right? Okay, likewise, to finish that question, is that vitamin A, meaning acetyl palmitate and retinol palmitate, has been shown to be linked to osteoporosis and increase all-cause mortality and increase cancer deaths as well. It's better to get your vitamin A elevated because you're eating a lot of different carotenoids, and the body can make the amount of vitamin A it needs from the wide spectrum of carotenoids you eat in colorful plants. The minute you start taking vitamin A in excess, a synthetic supplement for it, you could be taking too much of that compound. Instead of your body making enough, you get excessive amounts. That doesn't mean vitamin A and folic acid might be good in a person who's starving or gets no nutrients or is eating just junk food, or you know what I mean? But generally speaking, they are major factors driving cancer. And people should not be supplementing with vitamin A. And they shouldn't be supplementing with vitamin E either, for that matter. Because vitamin E has too many different fragments, and by supplementing with just one fragment, you could be blocking the absorption of another fragment. The same reason we saw beta-carotene supplements increased risk of lung cancer and heart disease risk, because when people were taking beta-carotene, as opposed to eating vegetables for carotenoids, you don't get the absorption of the full symphony, the full spectrum of all the carotenoids. When you take a lot of just one type, it can interfere with absorption of the other types, and it's exposure to the wide variety of these phytonutrients that extends human lifespan, not to take one isolated nutrient in a high amount. So yes, it's that we're talking about getting our nutrients predominantly from food with the full biological spectrum present, because there are multiple vitamin E fragments, there are multiple carotenoid fragments, there's lutein and lycopene and cryptoxanthine and we know that there's all these different fragments. And then, so it's we want to get our nutrients from food, and then the question is, okay, once you're on this diet where you're getting a wide amount of these nutrient levels from food, are there any individual nutrients that can be added to that to extend human lifespan and prevent shrinkage of the brain, shrinkage of the immune system, shrinkage of the bones, things that happen as we age? It's natural to weaken your bones, weaken your muscles, weaken your brain, weaken your immune system. People die, they don't live forever. And yes, getting a little extra zinc as we age can prevent weakening of the immune system and weakening of the brain, and a little extra DHA can prevent that, and a little extra, so paying attention to plant protein to making sure we don't get too much hormones promoting growth, but too little can also be a problem too. We want to be in that sweet spot, right? So then, yes, paying a little more attention to these things to make sure we're in the beneficial range with supplementing conservatively. We know, for example, that certain compounds like the EGCG in green tea and extracts from multiple mushrooms, and the curcumins found in turmeric and black turmeric. And we know that there are certain compounds in plants that we don't generally eat all the time, and supplementing with some of those has powerful anti-cancer effects to extend human lifespan. So we've taken nutritional science to a higher level of kind of perfectionism to instruct people to how they could really use this scientific information for their own body's protection and to extend human lifespan.
How do you recommend the average person navigate these kinds of questions? So, one of the things I'm hearing from you is, again, sort of context matters when you're thinking about your diet, where some of that supplementation might be helpful, what kinds of things you should be increasing. If I get back a set of blood test results and I've got my nutrients and they're the various things, and I'm committed to cleaning up my diet in some way, how do you recommend? What do folks do? Do they go read a book? Do they go try to work with the nutritionist? Do they take it to their GP and say, here, give me some advice?
I don't know. I mean, really, most doctors and nutritionists are inadequate to answer these questions. I write books and people can read my books. They can come to my website and ask me questions. But there are, like I mentioned earlier, there is a board certification for doctors specializing in nutrition and lifestyle medicine called the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, ACLM. And they can look up for doctors who have at least certified or board certified in ACLM to help advise them, because you get all kinds of people with opinions and crazy opinions out there. So I would say, at least stick with somebody who's ACLM associated physician. And there's 8,000 of those doctors across the country.
Yeah, that's really helpful. It's a question we get a lot: is how do I find somebody who's going to put forward this sort of lifestyle focus?
Right, a good lifestyle, which includes not just food, includes having good emotions and sleeping and exercising and not being exposed to pollution. And as we're doing, we're trying to live as healthily as we possibly can.
Well, maybe that's a good place to wrap up. One of the other things I wanted to get to on this idea of nutrient levels, testing them, moving them, improving them, is how movable these are. And again, I'm sure this will vary by nutrient that we're talking about here. And I know that lifestyle, exercise, stress, et cetera, plays a role in all of this, right, as it does for all of our health. So if we think about somebody who is committed to improving their diet, who's going to try to exercise, who's going to do the things, how movable and over what time frame should we expect to see improvements if we need to work on some of these?
That's a good question. And people aren't going to like the answer either. Because the answer is, when we follow people's antioxidants and carotenoid levels in their tissues, we find that it takes 9 to 12 months of eating healthfully to see the levels go from 10, 20, 30,000 to where they should be at 80, 90, or 100,000. So you don't just suddenly eat healthy for a week or two and your levels of nutrients in your tissues are at ideal levels. You got to eat healthily for a year And you got to drop a lot of body fat in the process if you want to see a nutrient concentration of your tissues. Just imagine if you lost 100 pounds of body fat, you just doubled the concentration of antioxidants in the remaining mass in your body. You just took away, so if you were 50% body fat and now you're 15% body fat, your level of nutrient concentration in your tissues just went up by 60%. You know what I'm saying? So yes, it takes time to fix some of these things, and people have to be patient but even while they're fixing it, we see incredible progress in how people are feeling. Their diabetes goes away, their blood pressure normalizes, their headaches go away. They don't have to achieve measured perfection to start to feel better and be healthier, even though it might take longer to get to that level of really in the ideal range. You know what I mean? But good question.
Are there to that point about, something like if you're trying to bring a prediabetes or a type 2 diabetes down, right, you're going to be looking at insulin, you're going to be looking at A1C. Are there other proxy markers related to nutrients as we think about a large blood test of some kind that you would watch that would be moving as your health is improving, as your diet is improving?
Believe it or not, the most important one is body fat percent. Because as the body fat percent goes down, and it's the direction of travel of the body fat percent. Let me explain this. A person is 80 pounds overweight, right? And they just losing 3 pounds a week, and they just lost 25 pounds, their diabetes is gone. They're still 60 pounds overweight now. They lost the first 20 pounds of the 80 they were overweight. They're still 60 pounds overweight, but their diabetes is gone. If they keep losing weight, it'll never come back. But if they start to gain weight, and they gain a little, their diabetes will come back again. Let's say they lost 40 pounds. Great, I lost 40 pounds. That's phenomenal. Go to Las Vegas and pig out at the buffets and gain back 10, and you're still 30 pounds down. But if you gain back 10, your diabetes is back, even if you're 30 pounds down. Because you just gained back 10. And you know what? Your cholesterol went back up. Your insulin resistance went back up. Your inflammatory markers, your HSC or P, went back up. The markers of heart cardiovascular death, myeloperoxidase and oxidized LDL just went up. What I'm saying is that losing weight is a tremendous benefit in improving markers and lowering risk. But if you start gaining weight, you're going to be pushing your numbers in the other direction pretty quickly. So weight becomes a primary direction of travel. I say you're a nutritarian. The diet, when you're eating healthfully and at your ideal weight, or you're eating healthfully and you're moving in the direction of your ideal weight. But if you start traveling in the wrong direction, or you're overweight and not losing, then there's something you're doing wrong, and you can't expect the blood markers to fix themselves. The blood markers fix themselves when you're traveling in the right direction and you're eating the right foods and the right amount of those foods. So people have to eat a lot of the right foods, and they have to try to figure out, be a scientist artist in their own body, the art of knowing their perfect caloric window that meets their metabolism, their exercise capacity, and their genetics that tell, well, how many calories do I need to keep my body fat under 15% as a 70-year-old male? You know what I mean? To the amount of exercise I'm doing, I figured out, I should eat about this. I feel like eating about this much of food. It's working. I'm not gaining weight. So people have to figure this out and keep going in the right direction.
How do you recommend people figure that out? How much of it comes down to feeling? I've heard you talk about the idea of sort of, I don't want to misconstrue this, but I think it's like basically learning to eat when you're hungry, not just because you have cravings or because it's lunchtime.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you don't eat enough healthy food, you never can get the instinctual connection with hunger. So I tell people, well, let's have you eat a giant salad every day, have at least a half a cup to a cup of beans every day, at least 1 to 2 ounces of nuts and seeds every day, at least 3 to 5 pressures of fresh fruit a day, at least, we're giving people at least a half a cup of onion and mushroom a day. Let's see, what are you eating? So let's at least give you the basic prescription of what you should be eating every day of healthy food. And then once we get nutrients in your body, we can start to deal with your cravings and why you were overeating. Because until you supply some nutrients and some fiber and some tissues and you're not going to be instinctually connected with the body's signals how much food you should eat. You're going to want to overeat all the time because you're nutritionally deficient. So first, it's more a question of, at the beginning, at least getting enough healthy food in the body. And that'll crowd out more of the unhealthy stuff too, and you start to feel more satisfied. But you're right, I'm saying eventually when a person gets healthy enough, then that takes time. Then they can eat what they feel like eating, because the amount of food they feel like eating will be the right amount of food. But that's because they've achieved the nutrient adequacy we're talking about here.
Right. One more question on the body fat, because you brought that up, and I think that's such an interesting idea that, we've got all the blood markers, but we've also got body fat percentage. And one of the things we've written about and talked about is DEXA scans as a way to know about your body fat percentage. I'm curious how you think about DEXA or other measures of body fat, and what particularly should you be looking at, how you think about different kinds of fat on the body, and just how should people, let's go a little bit deeper into that question of body fat percentage and what you should be looking at.
DEXA scans are the most accurate, of course. But I'm okay with the electrical impedance. We use the in-body, those other, because it doesn't have to be so perfect, so accurate. People know they're overweight. And we take care of, we have a retreat here in San Diego where people come who are overweight and stay with us for months to get well, but not just to lose weight and to get off their medications for diabetes and high blood pressure, but to learn the intellectual knowledge and the emotional and wisdom teachings that helps them feel comfortable, satisfied, both physically and intellectually, and at peace, and change their taste muscle to enjoy eating this way, and learn the recipes to make it taste great, right? So they learn the skills they need to stick with it long term. But what I'm saying to your question right here is that, it could take a time for a person to change, but unless you stop drinking alcohol, you have to have time away from it, right? You can't, you keep lighting the fire under your desire by eating addictive and fast food and junk food and commercial baked goods and sweets and candy and salt. You're never going to get your body connected with you're always going to want those things. So it does take a period of when people are home in their own homes to getting the junk and dumping it into a construction garbage bag and eat the healthy food every day, have a big serving of cooked green vegetables every day at night, maybe a wok vegetable dish, have a salad every day for lunch with the beans on top and the onions on top and the tomatoes cut in and the scallion or onion on there, and chew it up really well and eat it, and and try to start to eat right, and don't decide how much you like it right now. That takes time to rechange your taste preferences and rechange your taste muscle. And that's from getting rid of the extra salt, the extra sweets, the extra fried foods. You have to be off those things that are hyper palatable to get yourself to like this stuff more. So for the initial start, you just got to start doing it and not judge whether you like it so much, but we'll make people like it, and their body will adjust. They'll learn the recipes, their tastes will change, and they'll learn to like this stuff if they start doing it, learning the recipes and doing it. But they got to do it at the beginning, even if it temporarily makes them feel a little worse, because they're going to feel better smoking cigarettes, not stopping. They're going to feel better drinking coffee, not stopping. They're going to feel worse, a little weaker when they stop the salt. And when they switch to a healthy diet, they're not going to feel better right away. It temporarily is going to make them feel a little bit fatigued out and weak from not the overstimulation by stopping the detox process of the body. We can talk about this forever, but the point I'm making is when people make a change for the better, that's as strong as I'm recommending, they have to understand that could enhance so-called withdrawal symptoms, detox symptoms, and they can temporarily, for like a week or so, even feel a little worse, and plus their taste buds are still not converted over, so try just to do it without judging it so much. When people come to me with a severe medical problem, I'll say, look, if you want to test whether this works, you have to let me decide what you eat, not you make these decisions, because your decisions up to this point got you in this problem. If you want to test scientifically whether you can get rid of the problem, then really test what I'm telling you to do and do it, eat this way whether you like it or not. But I'll promise you in month 2 or 3 that you're going to love eating this way if we work on the recipes and you give your taste buds a chance to change over,
That's where I imagine, given that can be challenging, things like watching your body fat percentage or watching some of your blood markers, or whether it's your glucose or whatever, those kinds of markers can ideally be, as you mentioned earlier, inspirational in some way to say, well, look, this is still hard. Maybe I don't love everything, but boy, I can't argue with the fact that these things are
My
improving.
cholesterol dropped. Of course, keep in mind the hemoglobin A1C is on the red blood cell membrane. That takes 3 months. So even though the person's diabetes is gone, the hemoglobin A1C at the first month is still not great yet. We got to wait till 3 months later and recheck it, and then you'll see how good it got to. So some of these things lag behind. Even cholesterol could be a lag to a degree, because while you're burning up fat on your body, you're still living off a high saturated fat exposure that was stored in your own tissues, which can artificially pump the cholesterol up. So until the person gets closer to their ideal weight, you don't see the drop in cholesterol and triglycerides that's possible for them to achieve from eating this way.